We got a little bit of action to talk about this week. Things are picking up in the Major League Baseball offseason, including for the Brewers, who made a couple of moves within the last week and a half here. We've got a trade, we've got a split contract, we've got some minor league signings, and some news and rumors from the winter meetings to go over. I feel like we're playing catch up a little bit with the way that the timing worked out for this episode, but we're going to cover it all within the next 90 minutes or so on the Brewer Fanatic podcast. Spencer, before we dive into any of that, I haven't spoken to you. I guess this is face to face. We're doing this over a video call like we usually do. But I haven't spoken to you in quite a few weeks now. So how have you been?
I was doing great until like the middle of the weekend, and I'm like, I've never felt as old as I'm going to as I tell this story, but let me just get through the story. Middle of the weekend, I was laying in bed late at night, and I suddenly, felt a sneeze coming, so couldn't hold it in, couldn't stop it. So I sneezed, immediately feel like a little pop in my upper back near my neck. Didn't really hurt, just felt a pop. Fell asleep, no problem. Woke up a little tight the next morning, no big deal. I don't know what happened, but suddenly Monday I could barely get out of bed because I couldn't pick my head up off the pillow without lifting it up with my hands. So that was a fun experience. But then even that, like, I did okay. Monday into Tuesday, I found a position in bed somehow, fell asleep, no issues. Did not sleep for a single minute from Tuesday to Wednesday. Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, did not sleep once. I went from my bed to the couch. I tried to sleep on the floor for a while. I was trying to find anything to sleep. So I didn't sleep for a single minute. I did a little catch up yesterday. Finally found a spot on the couch that I can sleep in with my neck. But I have a heating pad currently on me underneath my hoodie here. So if anyone's watching on video, no, my shoulders didn't just get much buffer. No, I have a heating pad underneath there. And yeah, it's feeling better today, luckily. But this was, like I said, I have never felt this old because I could barely get into and out of my desk chair at work. I mean, I've had back issues before, all in my lower back. I've never had something in my upper back, and it just felt so debilitating. I feel like I can't do anything, and I'm slipping around on ice outside, which is no doubt making things worse. Yeah, so otherwise, everything's been great, but I am still annoyed by this back thing, and I'm hoping I can sleep tonight. It sounds so lame, but I genuinely could not sleep, and it sucked.
If you wouldn't have said anything, I would not have known that you were wearing a heating pad. Maybe that's because I
That's
just
good.
don't care about the little details of your life that much, or I don't pay attention that much. But I'm glad to hear that you've joined me on the train of having nights where you don't get a single minute of sleep.
Yeah.
You know about this. For me, it's usually if I have something going on the next day where I know I need to get up earlier than usual. Anyone who knows me knows I'm not a morning person at all. Like, I'm more likely to be writing something at 2:30 in the morning than I am to go to bed at a reasonable hour and just wake up early in the morning and do it. So anytime that I have to get up super early for something, that kind of throws my internal clock for a loop. And I think there's like this mental hurdle with that my body can't get past. So if I have to get up for something important the next day, like very early for something important, like college baseball, for example, if we have a trip and we got to leave at 4:30 in the morning or something to go out of state and play at noon or whatever. Um, Usually, if that happens, I will not get a single minute of sleep. Maybe I'll get 45 minutes at most, just because I don't know what it is, but I can't. It just doesn't happen. So, a little bit different circumstances for you, but welcome to the club.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think I had done this since, well, I can think of the last time I did this. I did this while I was watching Breaking Bad during COVID. I had nothing going on. School was finished. I didn't have a job yet. I finished the last season of Breaking Bad, just stayed up the entire night watching it. Before that, it was probably like sleepovers in like middle school that I was like, yeah, I can stay up all night. And then I was probably sick for a week after for no reason. I think that was the last time I was doing that before now.
I've never pulled an intentional all nighter. It's always been on accident, I guess. But it's probably happened like 10 times now. So it's not fun, but that's okay. We push on, adapt, improvise, overcome. Anyway, we should probably talk about some baseball stuff. I was trying to find a seg there to go into this trade, but I really couldn't think of one off the top of my head.
We
The Brewers
podcast as
traded
well. We do all those things and we podcast.
The Brewers traded Isaac Collins and Nick Mears to the Royals a few days ago for left-handed reliever Angel Zerpa. This is an interesting one. Mainly, not so much the fact that it happened is interesting to me because, again, like we had talked about this. We wanted the Brewers to make a move like this, specifically with guys like Isaac Collins and Nick Mears, if that kind of deal was out there for them. I think Mears is the one we really said, like, you should try to move him. Collins, we were a little more on the fence of, like, well, is anybody really going to give anything up for him? Like, I feel like everybody's going to be seeing the kind of things that we were seeing and that the Brewers are presumably seeing with Isaac Collins and his outlook. But not interesting to me, at least from the standpoint of, like, I wanted this to happen. If I'm the Brewers and I'm trying to figure out the way that they're going to, approach these guys moving forward, cash them in for something, I think that's the way that they should have operated. But what was interesting more so, to me at least, the reactions, not only from the Brewers fan base, I kind of figured there'd be some confusion there because, again, a lot of people, and I get it, you're not going to be looking at all of the deeper underlying stuff that is driving a lot of these decisions. But seeing the reaction from some pretty well-established analysts, including some well-established analytical analysts across baseball, a lot of very reputable people saying or expressing some confusion why the Brewers would do this, feeling like the Brewers are shaping up as very clear losers of this trade, and it's not even close because they gave up two controllable pieces for Zerpa, who in his own right has 3 years of control left, but it's a 2-for-1 deal, and the one guy they're getting back is probably a reliever. The Brewers are leaving the door open to starting, but I would imagine he's probably going to end up pitching out of the pen. But that's what was interesting to me. So it seems to me like it just seems like a lot of people, I think, are overvaluing just how good Isaac Collins is going to be moving forward. And I think that's where a lot of this stems from. Like I said, we had talked about Mears and the concerns that we had with him. We talked about Collins, too, and the concerns that we had with him. But it seems like a lot of people haven't quite caught on to, number one, like some of the underlying stuff with Collins, but maybe number two, the trajectory of his season. Maybe this is what people are missing a little bit more, that in my mind actually makes this a very fair deal value-wise. And we'll talk about Zerpa after we talk about the first two guys that they gave away. I think there's a very good chance that the Brewers end up benefiting from this deal quite a bit more than Kansas City does.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is, and you talked about the trajectory of Collins' season, and I think that's a really big part of it. Like, this is a guy that they weren't putting in the outfield in the playoffs, despite Jackson Chourio playing through a pretty bad leg problem that was going on. And obviously they could have gone the direction of Yelich in the outfield and Chourio DHing if they were going to do it. But either way, they had the opportunity. We weren't really seeing him out there in the playoffs. The defense really, and we talked about it early on in the season, we were kind of shocked at the level of defense he was playing out in left field because it really came out of nowhere. And I had watched him in the minors where he had played a lot more of a true utility role. He'd played a bunch of positions, but that included left field and in some pretty small parks like Biloxi, where you're not covering a ton of ground and you don't really have to do all that much to make it work defensively. He never showed well defensively in the minors. Like, it had never been. I thought second base was probably the spot where he could maybe hold up the best watching him in the minor leagues. Outfield, I kind of thought, if you're in a pinch, you might be able to put him out there. To his credit, he was incredible out there to start the year. He was getting fantastic jumps. His routes were always a little shaky, but the jumps and the initial reads were so good that it was making up for all of it. And really, most of the time, that is going to be the thing that can separate you more than anything else. But that didn't hold up. As the second half hit, like, he was grading out negatively by pretty much every measure as the season progressed. And part of it was that the jumps just weren't at the same level. And then combines with some of the route issues and some of it could be lack of experience still in the outfield. But to me, a lot of the people talking about how Collins has this like really nice floor, I think they're assuming that the defense that we saw in the totals for the advanced metrics are more what he's going to end up being longer term. And I'm more inclined to think that the first 3 months of the season are the outlier for Collins, and that defense, what we saw in the second half is more likely to be at least closer to what we see moving forward. Maybe it meets a little bit in the middle and he grades out as like an average defender out there. But even if that's the case, I think we're talking left field only as an outfield defender. So you're talking an average left fielder. You and I talked a lot about during the season the bat and why we were expecting regression in that regard. So if you'd like to cover some more of that, go ahead. But like this is to kind of sum up what I think he's going to be moving forward. I think we're talking about a guy who's still going to be pretty high on base because he does make very good swing decisions and he doesn't chase much. And I think he's going to continue to draw walks, and he's enough of a threat offensively to keep pitchers from going like the Oliver Dunn route of just chucking fastballs in the zone at him and knowing that he's not going to be able to do anything. But I think we're going to be talking about a guy who settles into like that 95, maybe 100 WRC plus range offensively, and then is, I think, probably going to be an average at best left field only type in the field. That's a fine bench player, and he's a pretty good athlete. He's a switch hitter. There's value in what he can bring to a team. And I do want to be clear too, he has a lot more value for a team like Kansas City than he was going to for the Brewers, because their floor before this trade was much worse than the scenario I just laid out for Isaac Collins and what I think he's probably going to be moving forward. This raises their floor at that position, but it doesn't really raise the Brewers' floor much. I would imagine, one, pretty much every option the Brewers still have now, the Brewers actually view as a better defensive option than Isaac Collins moving forward. I think they would view every one of them, Yelich aside, but all the rest of the outfield options as most likely a better defensive option. And we know they value that a lot on its own. And then I would guess that most of them project pretty similarly, maybe slightly worse, but in other cases, probably slightly better internally offensively for the future. And Isaac Collins, like I said, I think what I talked about, 90 to 100 WRC plus, is probably where he ends up settling in. I would imagine, we talked about this when they made the trade for Lockridge, but I would imagine the Brewers kind of view him as a guy who could get into that range, because I don't think they make the trade they did if they don't think that's the case. And Lockridge, I think, is going to be a very good defender moving forward. Blake Perkins, we already know what Blake Perkins is. Great defense, and he can also settle into that 90, 95 WRC plus range on a given season without much of a surprise. Garrett Mitchell, you're getting the great defense. You might get 40 games, but if he's out there, you get the great defense. And we've seen flashes with the bat. You and I both don't really have much belief in his offensive ability moving forward, but the talent and the potential is absolutely there for more than what you could get at the high-end version of Isaac Collins if everything does end up clicking for Mitchell. They have Luis Lara, who is also probably one of the best defensive outfielders in the minor leagues. They signed two guys that we'll get to in a little bit here that bring the defensive end of the spectrum at a really, really high level. And then there's some questions with the bat. But I think a lot of what we're saying here is that, or what I'm saying here is that most of the options the Brewers have a higher defensive floor, because I really do think what you're going to get is closer to the second half of Collins defensively moving forward. And then I think the offense is similar with maybe a little more upside for a decent chunk of them. So that makes him pretty expendable. And he'll be a 28-year-old second-year player. He did a lot of good things for the Brewers this year. Super, super helpful. And I think they're cashing in by selling. It doesn't feel like, I worded it like this to somebody over text who was asking me about it because I got a bunch of people who were asking me about it immediately. Like, what are they doing? And the way I kept wording is that I feel like they're kind of selling high on Mears and Collins and buying low on Zerpa at the same time. And I know that doesn't sound like a fun idea or a good idea for a team, but I think that's what they're doing. And I can let you really dive into Zerpa here, but like for me, Zerpa is a guy who, with the Brewers defense, I think there's just going to be a lot of, it's a really, really good fit for what the Brewers do. I think they'll be able to tweak with some of the, honestly, I think you might see a little bit of like the Grant Anderson four seam able to actually all of a sudden generate some whiffs with it where it really wasn't there too often before. I think they're going to be able to mess with maybe the slider movement and all of that a little bit, but there's a lot with Zerpa that I like. It's a 97 mph sinker that gets grounders at an insane rate. Like that is a really good place to start for anybody. And then, Mears, we talked about on the last episode and we've talked about a lot, but he just seems like somebody who wore down as the season went on and just feels kind of ripe for regression in general because the fastball just does not get swing and miss at a level that is very sustainable. And unlike Zerpa, his fastball is not getting hit on the ground when it's put in play. It's a ball that's going to get hit in the air and potentially hit for homers. So I talked a lot about that, but I really did want to get the Collins part off my chest because I think that's the thing that people are. Collins is definitely the one people are most confused by and upset by. I think everyone understood Mears for the most part, but I think Collins is the one people are confused by more than anything. So that's where I'm at with it. But Jack, you might disagree with me on some of the things I said, but what are your thoughts? Is that kind of what you're thinking with how they went about looking at, especially the Collins part of it?
Yeah, I think that's got to be part of it. So again, like I want to raise like a little bit of hypothetical math here because I think there's a difference between what people expect moving forward from all these players and what is actually going to happen. So Isaac Collins in 130 games in 2025 was worth 2.5 F4. That's a very solid everyday player. And again, that's in 130 games. If he had actually played full time at that rate of production, he's probably closing in on a 3-win season. That's very solid, above average regular. He had a 122 WRC plus. And I think everybody's looking at that and saying that's number one, that's a really good player to begin with. But then, you look a little bit deeper under the hood. 344 weighted on base, expected weighted on base of 319. So that's based on plate discipline and what usually happens on the kind of batted balls that he hits. Now, the one thing that you could argue for continuing to beat that a little bit going forward, pretty much all of the surprising power that he got to, and that's what surprised me the most about his season, the power. He hit 9 home runs. All of them were air pull home runs. So he did a really good job of being able to tuck them down the line. My question with that is always, okay, if you can keep doing that, that you will keep beating some of your underlying metrics if you do that. That's a very real thing. Isaac Paredes is like the greatest example of this. But I usually need to see a lot of that over a pretty sustained run before I start believing that you actually have a skill for doing that, because I think it is a skill. I don't know how many guys who do it in a given season actually have that skill, or if they're just, over a certain sample, running into the ball the right way or being able to do it against certain pitches. So if Collins can continue to do that, I think that does help him a little bit offensively. I don't know if he will, though. Deserved runs created plus had him at 99, so basically an average hitter. Now, on top of that, this is also assuming that he doesn't get any worse within the next couple of years, too. Like, this is assuming that he stays exactly the same and then has some of that, that luck that he had. You're talking maybe like 3 fewer pulled fly ball home runs. He's going to be playing in a big park now at Kauffman. And, batted ball luck isn't quite what it was before on balls that were in play. If everything stays the same skill-wise, he's already going to take a step back. And I think like a lot of people know that's going to happen, but they're still looking at, league average bat and good defense, like you said. But now if you're actually getting to a point where what I think is going to happen is you're going to see Isaac Collins starting next year turn into a player who's Basically, probably I would guess like a 340 on base, 330 on base. I think he's going to keep getting on base, like you said, because the plate discipline is legitimately really, really good. And I don't think that's just going to go away. But if he's getting on base at a 340 clip and he's not slugging and the defense is average at best in left field too, mind you, where good defense is just not as valuable in left field as it is everywhere else because left field is at the bottom of the defensive spectrum, right down there with first base. So I think what's more likely to happen is instead of Isaac Collins being a 2.5 win player, I think he's probably a 1 win player in like a part-time role, maybe a little bit more than that. Now, again, for the Royals, who had the worst outfield in baseball last year, a negative WAR outfield, 1 win player Isaac Collins, all of a sudden that is a big upgrade for them. So this does make sense. And I'm guessing the Royals know that there's probably some regression coming here, but I think they're also shooting for floor on this one. And that's kind of like why they're probably comfortable giving away Zerpa too a little bit because, if you're looking for floor, Zerpa's got a decent floor just based on what he did in 2025. But I'm guessing the Royals are thinking we got other guys who can replicate what he did in 2025 if the results stay the same way. This is a bigger need for us right now. Again, Mears kind of balances out their bullpen a little bit. It gives them another righty that can pitch a middle relief. But the way that I'm thinking about the math is, okay, yes, the Brewers gave away these guys who combined for over 3 wins above replacement last year. But moving forward, if Isaac Collins is a 1 win player and Mears is probably a replacement level reliever at best, I think, you've given away 1 win for 2026. And then the trajectories of these 3 players, the 2 that the Brewers gave up and the one they got back, they're going in opposite directions. Collins and Mears are only going to keep trending downward. Zerpa's got a lot more room to start trending upward. So it's not about the past value, it's about future value. And teams are not thinking about future value based on the box score results that a player had the year before. We're well past that. There's just too many resources out there that help us understand what's going on the field and help us understand the process of the game. And not only help us understand it, but help us quantify it so we actually can recall with more precision what was happening instead of going off like, any bias or any flawed eye test or misremembering things. This is what teams are going to be making their decisions on. And the Brewers, when they look at Zerpa, they're seeing a guy who, even when he was not at his best last year, and I'll talk about some of the things that I think he can do to take that step forward. This is a guy who he had an ERA over 4, but even the peripherals are better. 3.86 FIP, 3.5 xFIP, 3.38 skill independent earned run average. His deserved run average, when you factor it against the league average, I think his deserved run average was like 74 or something. It was really, really, really good. I'm guessing it really likes the quality of contact that he's getting with all those ground balls. But those are all the best marks of his career. And again, this is with, I think, still some pretty glaring flaws in the way that not the way that all of his pitches work in isolation, but the way that they all kind of come together. It's really, really good stuff. It's a really heavy sinker. Not only is it 96 to 98, it's 96 to 98 with more depth than you would expect from a guy throwing from his slot. The Stuff models really like it. Stuff Plus gives it, 125? It grades it out as one of the better sinkers in baseball. Slider Stuff Plus is 126. His overall Stuff Plus is 117. That's the same as Abner Uribe's Stuff Plus last season. That ties him for like 16th among qualified relief pitchers, both of them. So you're talking about a guy who absolutely has the stuff in his arsenal to get guys out. Really, the missing link is the swing and miss, and he should be getting more swing and miss than what he's getting, especially on the slider. The slider is the one that surprises me.
Yeah.
I don't think that sinker's ever going to get a lot of swing and miss because it's not a swing and miss pitch. I think there's probably a little more room for what he's gotten so far, but just mainly based on the depth. Like Elvis Peguero actually got pretty decent whiff because he had so much depth when he was going well. But what they do with building around the sinker is going to be big for me. They are not going to change anything with that sinker. The Brewers love sinkers, especially good outlier sinkers. He's got that. I don't think they're going to change one thing with that pitch. What they're going to change, I think, is everything surrounding it. Or not everything surrounding it, but some of the things surrounding it to just allow his other pitches to play better off that sinker. Especially if he's pitching out of the bullpen, I think a lot of it right off the bat is going to be, at least going into the season, this is a really good pitch. We have a good infield defense. You're going to throw this thing like 70% of the time.
Yeah.
Or somewhere in that realm. Now, looking at the other stuff is where it gets a little interesting for me. So in the story that I wrote about him after they made the trade, the biggest thing that jumped out to me is just how poorly everything tunnels. Again, you can't say this for sure if you're not standing in the box, but based on some of the numbers and some of the visuals you can look at on Baseball Savant, it seems to me like everything he throws is a very early tell for the hitter. He's got, if you break down his arm angle by pitch type, and again, not if you look up every pitcher is usually going to have some kind of small difference in their arm angle from one pitch to the next. Because, if you got to get to a different spot on the ball with your hand and with your wrist, that's going to influence your arm angle just a little bit. But he's got a really wide range of slots based on what pitch he's throwing. When he's throwing the sinker, he goes way down further. When he's throwing the fast or the four seamer or the slider, he comes way up. And I'm assuming, I don't know if it's just to get on top of the ball a little more to try to get the spin he's looking for, whatever it is. And again, if you're talking like a difference of, I would say like 3 to 4 degrees from one pitch to the next, I don't know if that's enough on its own to tip the hitter off as to what you're throwing. But he's pushing like 8 to 10 degrees on some of these. And you look at then Savant lets you visualize this stuff too. You can visualize like the release point and the pitch trail of his pitch types. The slider jumps out like really early from the sinker, which is like normally not quite what you would expect from a slider. It turned into like a slurvier pitch this year too, and I don't think that helped him actually. I think that was worse for him just because of how it plays with some of the other pitches. It was a little harder for righties to hit on its own, but I think just in the grand scheme of things, like he still had really big reverse splits, and I think it's because there's such a big tell there. The Brewers are a team that, especially over the last couple seasons, we've talked about it with guys like Colin Ray and some of the other guys they bring in. Like, hey, come in here. You're going to throw 3 different kinds of fastballs. We want everything to make it look the same out of your hand. Like countless times that I've talked to Chris Hook, and he always keeps coming back to that. It was kind of the same thing with after they traded for Savali too, and I talked to Chris Hook about some of like the changes that they made to his arsenal because they brought back the shorter slider, not throwing as many curveballs, and one of the things Hook said was, "Yeah, the shapes were too big. I don't care. I don't care about the shapes so much as I care about everything looking the same out of your hand before it separates late." And Zerpa does not do that. He stinks at that. Now, I think it's a little less important for a reliever. We're also talking about like starting pitchers who the Brewers needed to get them through the order multiple times. They also just didn't have great stuff to begin with. So I think that was kind of their way of making up for it. Aaron Ashby, for example, there's very early separation on his pitches. He's a little bit different because he just gets so much movement. And if he's pitching out of the bullpen, I think it just works for him because, again, it's velo. The breaking balls separate early, but they have a ton of movement where I think even if you pick up on what it is, you still don't have a very good chance of hitting it. I think he's a little different. Zerpa's kind of in that weird gray area where he doesn't tunnel. The secondary shapes are not really good enough to, in my mind, get swing and miss if they're not tunneling. So, it doesn't need to be perfect for him again if he's pitching out of the bullpen. And, he's obviously going to lean on that sinker a lot. But if I had to guess with just take a stab, like a shot in the dark at what I think the Brewers are going to do here, I think it's going to be build around the sinker. Everything else, we got to tweak this a little bit to find a way to mask the rest of your pitches a little more. And I think if he can do that, especially with that breaking ball, whatever it ends up turning into, I think that's where you're going to start to see the swing and miss show up, where guys think it's a sinker out of the hand, but it's not. Because I think right now guys have a pretty early idea of what it is compared to, when they could be picking it up. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I don't know exactly what the solution will be. Maybe they go for a little bit more of like a gyro slider or something with a little more lift. Maybe they add a cutter in there. I don't know. He does seem like a guy who probably could throw one just based on looking at the numbers with kind of his release and how he spins the ball and some of this stuff. But I don't think they're touching the sinker. I think it's going to be the stuff that complements it that they're going to tweak a little bit. And it might be like changes that look pretty small on paper. But I think if they can just find a way to make everything a little bit more cohesive, I think that's where you're going to see the swing and miss. And really the fact that he's already getting monster ground ball rates, if his pitches are a pretty early C, that does go back to just how good the stuff is that guys, especially that sinker, still struggle to barrel up, even if they might know pretty early on that's what they're getting. So I think a lot of it's just going to come down to, how do we mask your pitches a little bit better? And if they can do that, I think that's going to be what really helps them take off.
Yeah. I mean, the other part of it too is that improving those other pitches can also just make the sinker better. So they help the sinker while the sinker helps these other pitches play off each other. And you might see, I mean, it's going to be hard to get much higher of a ground ball rate out of them. But you might see even more difficulty with the sinker because now they have to see it a little bit longer before they know if it is a, kind of rare four seamer. Is it the slider or the very rarely used changeup? I mean, it gives you just that split second. And we've talked about that before when we talk about pitch calling, right? Like that split second that you can buy where a hitter isn't sure of himself can make all the difference in an at-bat or in a single pitch, single swing. And that's exactly what you're talking about. And what makes the most sense as the way to move forward is to try and make hitters wait. And we're talking literally milliseconds because that's how long you have to react no matter what to hit a baseball. But the less time they have, the more it's going to benefit the pitcher. And like you said, even with Ashby, like I'm sure that's something they still try to improve upon because it would only make him better. Like if you can buy that extra split second for your pitcher, for the batter to not be able to make his decision, it goes a really, really long way. And that's exactly what they're going to be trying to do. I'm sure of it. Like you said, this is like a main focus for the Brewers and Chris Hook and the pitching staff in general as something that they're pretty non-negotiable on. Obviously, like you pointed out with Ashby, like if your stuff is that good and you're pitching really just once through the order, maybe a rare second time through for a guy like Ashby, it's not as important, but it still goes a long way if you can do it. And yeah, I mean, I wonder, like you said, they talked a little bit about potentially starting with Zerpa. I wonder if some of that would come down to how quickly and efficiently they think they could actually get this done. Because if they do get it to a point where all the pitches are coming out of a similar slot and there's less time to react, then yeah, I think the profile could end up lending itself to starting. And he's done it throughout the minors, so it's not like it's something that would be foreign to him and building up and that type of concept. But if they can't get it maybe as well as they hope to or as far as they want to, then I think they're going to be more than happy to put him in a pen roll and then hopefully get it to a point where it's better than it's been. And then it can be a really, really good leverage arm from the left side with a nasty sinker that can get you a bunch of grounders. And then if the other stuff works out, hopefully a little bit more swing and miss. Like he had very low whiff rates, but he still struck out over 20% of hitters. Like it was higher than DL Hall's strikeout rate, for example, not at the level of obviously an Ashby or even a Jared Koenig, but like it's not the worst strikeout rate because that sinker and he gets a decent amount of called strikes with it. I think that pitch is just hard on hitters to begin with. But if he can up the whiff, then there's a ton there. It could be a really, really effective bullpen arm. So to wrap all those thoughts up, like I think you kind of already said it, but it's an upward trajectory for him. And the other two, I think, are kind of going the opposite way. And the Brewers are trying to get a potential leverage arm for two guys that they probably didn't see as key components to next year's team under pretty much any circumstance. If either of them were, that probably means some things went wrong in their view. That would be my guess. So I think that's the logic behind it. I think I understand, like you said, Jack, early on, like not everyone is going to dig super deep into these things. And we've talked about it on here before, but we both have kind of the way we like to look at the game is to look at it through like a front office perspective and how you can continue moving forward as a team. And a lot of people as fans, they don't want to do that. They just want to watch their team and root for their team. And they see two guys who were very productive last year for the Brewers go for a guy who surface level stats had over 4 ERA and the same amount of control as Mears and less control than Collins. And like, that's a hard thing for people to understand in the moment. Like I said, I got a ton of texts when it happened from people just like, why did they do that? I got a text from someone at work who like, asked me about it. Like, everyone was confused, and I fully understand it, but hopefully Jack wrote a little bit about it, and then us kind of going through this, hopefully it at least helps people see what we believe the thought process is behind it and why we can both understand why they went this direction. And frankly, just my own opinion, I think there's a pretty good chance this is going to look pretty good by the end of the season in terms of the trade. And the Royals might not feel bad about it either. Like we talked about, like, they're getting stuff that they want. But I think the Brewers, I think all the people who are really questioning it loudly right now, and like you said, even some national analysts and people who do dig into this stuff, I think the vision will become more clear by the time we start to see him in season in the Brewers bullpen or potentially in the rotation. I think this will look a lot better as we dig into it, like this time next year.
We did get a question about kind of how this impacts the pitching staff as a whole, specifically the left-handed side of the pitching staff. The question, any worry about the redundancies with Aaron Ashby, Jared Koenig, Zerpa, Rob Z, and DL Hall? Feels like a lot of his trade is dependent on if Ashby or Zerpa can be a starter versus what we gave up for Zerpa. So I think the interesting thing here, at least for me, is having too many lefties is only a problem if they're all situational lefties. That's how I view it. And Koenig is I'm kind of on the fence about him because he was a situational lefty performance-wise for the entire first half, and in the second half, he completely changed his pitch mix to righties. And once he did that, he was no longer a situational guy. In fact, down the stretch, he was better against righties than against lefties. So on the fence about him. Ashby's, I don't really view him as a situational guy. Hall, I think, is just still in this spot where he's just kind of mediocre against everybody until the velo comes back, which again, and there's a role for him. Like if he's, a high threes ERA swing man, like you'll take that. Absolutely. But that's not, he's not a guy who should probably be pitching leverage spots against any handedness. Rob Z is the only one that I'm kind of on the fence on again. And we talked about him before. I wrote about him before with Nick Mears a few weeks before this trade, talking about two guys who, they're spotting the bullpen, just kind of looking at the way things are shaking out and the way that the bullpen's constructed. Those are the two guys who the Brewers may move on from in some way. They traded Mears. Rob Z is still here. And I like Rob Z's stuff a lot. I think he's a better pitcher than he gets credit for. I think the stuff is just really, really funky, and he has the ability to get a lot of uncomfortable swings, especially against lefties. But the reality is he is, out of this group, I think, the most situational guy, and he's out of options. So we did get another question kind of on a similar note asking, is he going to be with the team come opening day? And I'm not sure. And again, that's not because I don't like his stuff. Like, I think that there's a very effective pitcher in there, but I don't know if he's a great fit for this bullpen right now, the way things are shaking out. And, some of that could change if Ashby does end up starting. I would assume they're going to try it in spring training. Nobody's said anything, but it just seems like it's pointing that direction. And I think they should try it one more time. But Rob Z does still kind of feel like the one who is at risk of losing a spot here now with all the guys that they have.
Yeah, I kind of compiled a bunch of the stats for splits for all five of these guys just to see, because I had the exact same thought. I was like, I don't feel like these are situational lefties, which means it doesn't really matter where they are in the bullpen. Numbers wise, like Rob Z, there's a very, very large difference. Like we're talking against left-handed hitters last year is a 240 xWOBA. It was 336 against righties. The whiff rate was 39.4% against lefties, but it was 19.4 against righties. So, like, obviously a very big difference in the quality of contact, and then also the amount of contact. The walk rate was much higher against righties too. I think there's a level of maybe not fully knowing how to attack guys and maybe having to nibble a little bit when you're facing righties. And obviously situationally, there's probably times where the Brewers are instructing him to pitch around a righty to get to the next lefty and stuff too. But his numbers very much stand out. Hall actually had reverse platoon splits last year, although the quality of contact, no, he had normal platoon splits, both of them. Like, it's very funny looking at these numbers because I'm on the same page as you, but like righties had a 564 OPS against him, lefties had a 509 OPS, but the ex-Woba was 331 against lefties and 263 against righties. And it's not a huge sample, so it's not, but it's just funny. He definitely got hit harder by lefties. He walked more lefties than he did righties, although he did get more whiff and more strikeout against lefties too. So none of that's super shocking. Ashby is very, very similar across the board in terms of quality of contact, strikeouts, walks, whiff rate, very similar for him against lefties and righties. Koenig, like you said, the numbers look like a guy who has big splits, but we talked about that in July. And then, as you pointed out, the rest of the season, that was not an issue, and it was due to legitimate changes. So, and also, like, he hadn't really had that big of an issue with it the year before. So it feels like the first half of 2025 is a little bit more of the outlier than the other parts of his time with the Brewers, at least. So I would say you probably prefer him against lefties, but I don't think he's somebody that you have to be throwing out there against lefties. And then Zerpa, like, he was better against lefties for sure. The ground ball rate is insane. It was 78% against lefties. So lefties could not get the ball in the air against him. Like, that is a ridiculous number. The whiff rate was actually higher against righties, oddly, 18% against 14% against lefties. So that's a little interesting and kind of points to what you talked about with the slider. I feel like that's the pitch you would normally see the whiff against lefties, especially. And I think that's probably where they're hoping they can get some more whiff, is by getting it against lefties in those matchups and then relying on grounders and still getting some more whiff against righties. But if you can really get it up against lefties, that's probably where he's going to see the best improvement overall. I guess the only thing I'd add that we haven't said yet is, like, of this group, I think I might think DL Hall's the most likely to actually make starts for the Brewers next year. With the changes to the fastball mix, with the fact that he's not really ever going to be a big strikeout guy at this point, I don't think. But I do think with the different looks he can give, like, over the course of a twice through the order, fifth starter, like, you talked about being in a swingman role. Like, of all of these guys, I could see him ending up out of the bullpen and in the rotation. And I don't think that would be the ideal outcome for the Brewers, unless that velo is back, like you talked about. But I think of this group, he's the one I could actually see being the starter. And then in that case, like, I want Aaron Ashby being, not saying he's going to be at that same level, although numbers wise, since he came back, it's pretty close, but like, I want him being used kind of like prime Josh Hader. Like, I want him being used in a multi-inning leverage role where he is getting big outs in games because he has the grounders, he has the strikeouts. Like, I want him to be in that role. I don't want Aaron Ashby to be a long reliever next year unless it's a situation where it's absolutely needed. Like, that's where I would like his role to end up being. So I think you can find room for all of these guys, and Hall is a little bit of the linchpin for that in my mind. Now, even if he is the long reliever or the swingman, I think you can still make it work. I would like Rob Z to be on the team because I think there is, like, actually, he's your biggest weapon against lefties in some ways. Like, lefties really, really struggle with him. At the same time, I do think there's a chance that he doesn't end up on the team by opening day. I don't think that will be by DFA and lose. Like, I think they'd get something in a trade for Rob Z if they end up moving on from him. I don't think he's somebody they would just straight let go. Now, is it going to be an exciting piece? No, but I don't think he's somebody that they just view at any point as a roster casualty. The only thing that could change that maybe is another injury, because he has had quite a few injuries. And if something happened over the offseason or something, that could be tough for them to view him as somebody worthy of staying on the 40-man while they deal with that. But for now, I do think there's a pretty decent chance all five of these guys are in the pen. And I don't personally think it's going to be too big of an issue to maneuver it. But I mean, you don't add another lefty to this mix. Like, this is your group at this point. Like, you're rolling all righties the rest of the way out of the bullpen. But I think you can make it work. I think they could get by with this group and be just fine, because I think in the end, only one of them is actually a lefty specialist.
Part of this too is Hall does have an option near left, so if they
He does.
if they do feel like there is a crunch there, they can send him down. But again, that might come down to just kind of what role do they see him filling. But I do kind of get what you're saying with him, because you're not. This is not going to sound super complimentary. I don't mean it like this, but basically, it's the same profile no matter what role he's pitching in.
Yes.
You're not giving up any upside knowing that he's this much better out of the bullpen. This is just kind of, the stuff is what the stuff is. It doesn't get a lot of whiffs in this form. It missed barrels extremely well last year. He got a ton of weak contact. Is that going to continue with the mix of a bad strikeout to walk ratio? I don't think so. It's a weird mix that doesn't hold up over long samples no matter what. But I get what you're saying, because it's not like an Ashby situation where here's what he's looked like as a starting pitcher, here's what he's looked like as a reliever. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. Yeah, I don't think it's as big of an issue as it looks like on paper if you're just looking down the list and you see a bunch of lefties. So there's a lot of time, obviously, for that to shake out as well. We do have to move on here to some other news that we have to cover here. The Brewers, before they made this trade, they made their first MLB signing of the offseason. Technically, they signed Akil Baddoo to a split contract. So it's an MLB deal, but Baddoo has options left, so they can still send him down. Split contract basically stipulates that he's going to get this salary when he's in the big leagues. When he's in the minor leagues, he's going to get this salary, which is usually above what a lot of minor league players make. That's basically the arrangement here. Probably a guy who is almost certainly just going to serve as AAA depth until they need him. And I don't think there's a whole lot more to really say about that. He does have the former prospect pedigree. The plate discipline has been inconsistent at best. There's always been quite a bit of swing and miss in there. Did show a decent amount of air pull pop in the minor leagues last year, but again, it's depth, and I don't think there's really a need to go super deep into it. Something would have had to have gone wrong, I think, if he's on the team on opening day or really for any extended stretch of time. This is just a guy who gives the Brewers someone that they can turn to if it does get that far, and someone who maybe they feel a little bit better about than, some of the alternatives if you're going down to like that 7th spot on the outfield depth chart.
Right. I think that's pretty much what it is. I mean, the one thing I'm curious about is he was kind of trending up in terms of how he was grading out defensively in the outfield during his major league career. This is a guy who, he was a Rule 5 pick, I believe, originally by them, right? By the Tigers back in the day from the Twins. And he came up and he actually hit pretty well, and not really backed super well by peripherals, but like he was hitting pretty well to start his career. He's a good athlete. My guess is that they liked what they saw defensively last year. And that's because I kind of, like I said, during the whole Isaac Collins thing, like they value defense quite a bit. And if you can be a fill-in that plays really good defense and you just take whatever you get offensively, I think that's what they're going to be looking for most of the time in depth signings and depth pieces. But there's at least a little upside because, like you said, he did show some pop in AAA. He is pulling the ball in the air. He did walk quite a bit in AAA. But there's whiff and there's decent amount of chase. And there always has been more chase too. He just did a little bit better in AAA with it. It's a depth piece more than anything. I think the one thing that was surprising to me, it's not a huge deal, but the fact that they kind of felt the need to go out and give a guy like this a 40-man spot when it's pretty tight right now in terms of what they have in their 40-man roster. I was a little surprised they did this, but to me, that just means they liked him more than really the other options, and they view him as good enough depth to play in the big leagues, and nobody else out there that would sign a minor league deal was worthy of that in their eyes, or at least not to the same extent. So it's not a huge deal. I was just surprised that they were giving a 40-man spot up for a guy like Baddoo, but like I said, there are things to to like and to be at least somewhat intrigued by. So if they can help the swing decision stuff a little bit and help the whiff a little bit, then yeah, maybe there's something there offensively, and maybe the defense took a step last year. Otherwise, it's an athlete who has some interesting tools, who's, like Jack said, kind of the seventh guy on the totem pole, maybe sixth now that you've traded Collins, but still we're a ways off from seeing Baddoo in the big leagues.
3 more minor league signings that we're going to talk about really quickly here, rapid fire. On the same day that the Brewers signed Akil Baddoo, they signed first baseman and outfielder Greg Jones to a minor league deal. Spencer, I know you talked about him on the minor league podcast a few days ago. Basically a guy who was a decently high draft pick a while back, but basically it's just he doesn't touch the baseball. Ridiculous swing and miss issues in the minor leagues, and that's what's held him back.
Yeah, he was a first rounder by the Rays in 2019. He is very, very fast. Like, I think Fangraphs put an 80 on his speed. Very, very fast dude. And I watched him play against the Sounds last year in one game, and that dude was causing problems on the bases. There's some actual pop in his bat too. Like, 90th percentile EV is pretty high. His max exit velocity has been over 112, 113. I think he hit 113 in the big leagues. His only major league hit is a home run off of JP Fireeisen, which is a funny little thing there. But it's a good glove in the outfield. You said first. He's actually played short and second in the past. He was a shortstop originally, so he's played some middle infield. I actually wonder if and he'll probably have opt-outs and stuff too, so maybe this won't end up working, but somebody that fast who's a good base runner, you just always wonder if they're thinking, maybe in September he becomes the Quentin Berry, the Terrence Gore, that type of guy for your team. Like, if we get him in the organization and he sticks, he's at least an option to potentially do that later in the season. Those are less common now, that especially like there's no 40-man roster in September where you used to be able to just call guys like that up and have them play a really, really specific role. But there is still some of that in the playoffs, so you never know. But yeah, nothing crazy. But I mean, I pulled up the Fangraphs, like his last scouting report had the 80 speed that I talked about. It also had a 70 future glove. So again, we talk about the defense. Like, if they think he could come up and just play a great outfield and run the bases, they might find a spot for him if they're in desperate need of something. So there's at least that to fall back on.
Next guy we're going to talk about quickly is Gerson Garabito. He signed a minor league deal, right-handed pitcher. He got a little bit of time with Texas last year. Wasn't super successful, but I'm going to let you take the lead on this one too, because you were the one who already made the points I was going to make anyway when you kind of tweeted out a little synopsis of him. Really interesting stuff. Like, across the board, none of it grades out amazing, but it all grades out well. And I think the way that all those shapes complement each other, we kind of talked about maybe there's some things to clean up for Zerpa. I actually think that he's got a pretty wide range of shapes covered with that arsenal, and I think it can play really, really well together in kind of a bulk role of some sort.
Yeah, for a 30-year-old AAA depth piece, like, I was expecting to go look up the pitches and be like, oh, okay, he's just kind of there to help in AAA, and then I was immediately like, oh wait, there's stuff there. He's only like 93, 94 with the fastballs, four seam, and a sinker. Good separation on those two pitches. Both of them can play in different ways. And at the big league level, the four seam actually had a little bit better shape than it did at the AAA level, but it's not a bad one. I mean, it's got about 18 inches of induced vertical break on average, which is pretty good carry on the pitch. And it's not a super high arm angle, so that's not anything crazy. Or that's not anything that, like, you should expect, I should say, from a super, super high arm angle. Vertical approach angle was like negative 4.7, so a little bit better than average. But then you have the sinker, and then what is labeled as a slider, but is really, I mean, it's a cutter. I think it's a 3 fastball mix with good separation in terms of how the pitches play and how they play off of each other. The breaking ball is called a curveball. It's labeled as a curveball. I mean, in reality, I would say it's more like a slider, and it's got a pretty wide range in terms of how much sweep it's getting on the pitch. So I wonder if They might be able to tighten that up a little bit, make it a little bit more consistent than what we saw at the big league level. But some of them were pretty good pitches. I mean, 15 to 20 inches of sweep on some of them with pretty close to 0 induced vertical break. So, like, that's bordering on a sweeper at that point. And then you also, or it is a sweeper really at that point. And then you've got some shorter ones. I mean, it's possible he's also throwing 2 different variations of it. I wasn't able to dig super deep into that. But the point being, like, with all of those pitches and a change up that he takes like 6-7 miles per hour off and gets some pretty good depth on. And in AAA, it was actually better. He would get some under 0 in terms of induced vertical break. So that's a pretty big break on a changeup with pretty decent arm side. It's similar shape to the sinker, but again, taking off about 7 miles per hour from it, like, that can go a pretty long way. So I just think it's a 5-pitch mix, legitimately can play off of each other. He's been a starter in the minor leagues, so he's got bulk capabilities. And I also think if you put him in the pen, you might get a little bit of a tick up with some of this stuff. It might be able to play a little bit better. It didn't even mention, like, he gets almost 7 feet of extension on every pitch. So, like, there's a little bit of that going on too, helping what isn't great velo maybe play up a tick or two. So yeah, it's just an interesting profile that I really was not expecting to see when I looked him up. And even it was only 8 innings, but people will probably notice the 9 ERA. But the strikeout to walk, like, he had a 19.5% strikeout rate and only a 2.4% walk. AAA, the walks were a bit higher, but the FIP was 3.89 in those 8 innings. So, like, it's a small sample in the big leagues. The overall numbers didn't look good, but the stuff is pretty good. And some of the small sample underlying numbers look pretty good too. So just more than anything, it was a nice little pleasant surprise to see somebody that I was like, oh, that I could see him helping the Brewers at some point this year. And it would not surprise me if he did.
The Brewers also signed left-handed pitcher Drew Rom to a minor league deal, former Cardinals left-hander. Dealt with some injuries over the last couple seasons. He's missed a lot of time. He did return to the mound in 2025, and then he ended up back on the shelf again later in the year. I'm not quite sure exactly what he throws here because I tried looking at the pitch plots, and it's just kind of all over the place. When he debuted in the big leagues, he was, again, there's very little information out there just because he hasn't pitched much. But when he debuted in the big leagues a couple of years ago, I'm just going to assume he was throwing more of, like, kind of the hybrid splinker type pitch because he was sitting right around like 0 vert on it, even though he's got a pretty decent carry 4-seamer, and it was like 3 miles an hour slower than the 4-seamer. Seems like for the most part, he went to more of like a traditional 2-seamer when he got back on the mound this year, but there's still a couple that are down in velo and have more depth. Is everything that's getting tagged as a splitter there's no consistency whatsoever to the shape here. And I don't know that that's by design because when he debuted, the splitter shapes are all pretty consistent. I mean, you have stuff that's anywhere from quite literally anywhere from like a 4-seam shape to a sinker shape to a cutter shape to a slider shape, all within one pitch type, or at least that's the way it was tagged. And I'm going off of Brooks Baseball here too. They're way better at tagging pitch types than Savant is. Savant honestly sucks at it for the minor leagues. So
yeah,
it's an interesting mix here. I would, before I can really comment on it further, like, number one, the health is the big one. Number two, I would like to have a little more clarity on what he actually throws.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would imagine most of what they're taking as splitters is probably based on the spin. Because it is obviously a pitch that kills the spin quite a bit more than the other pitches, but still, like, looking at the plot, I mean, it is insane, the wide range of just on mine, it's the orange, but it's like, it, like you said, it spans the length of pretty much like 6 pitch types. Like, there are so many things that could be in that range. And like, some of them are cutting, some of them are backing up, some of them are right around that 0-0. Some have some more depth to them. Like, there's
some
just
of them are full on breaking balls with how these pitches are moving. So
right.
My guess is there's just a little bit of confusion here, but he's got a pretty good, like, if you just remove the pitch type tags from him and you just look at purely the shapes, he's got a pretty neat spread, like good coverage here. He can go
Mm-hmm.
from something with more carry and not a lot of run to something that's got run to something that's right in the middle to something that's got like a little bit of break to something that's got big sweeping break. So it's like a nice line that you can draw through the entire thing. It's just not immediately clear what is what.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's a lefty arm with, like you said, at least some interesting shapes. We don't know what the health is going to be. He was originally, I believe, traded to the Cardinals for Jack Flaherty from the Orioles. And he was a decent prospect at that time. I remember some people being pretty surprised that the Cardinals were able to get somebody of his level for Flaherty at that time who had struggled and basically was asking out. And the Cardinals were pretty happy to oblige at the time, too. So it hasn't worked out super well. Obviously, his big league debut did not go very well at all. And then, like you said, a bunch of injuries. So we got to find out exactly what he's throwing. We got to see how it actually plays. But the Brewers obviously see something here. And I don't think this is one of those. It's not like a Bruce Zimmerman, hey, we're signing this guy to eat innings. He's 26. He's got some recent prospect pedigree. Like, I don't know exactly what it is, but they see something that's actually worthwhile in terms of like seeing some upside here, not just like an innings eater type. I would imagine they're seeing something that is worthwhile in terms of giving him a look and seeing if they can kind of put some stuff together and maybe figure out the splitter or exactly how he's going to use it. But yeah, that one is definitely more of a, we just got to let it play out and kind of see how it goes at first. And then maybe we'll have some more certain opinions as we get deeper into the season next year or something.
The winter meetings are last week, so we've got a couple bullet points to hit from Orlando. The first one, we're behind on this one compared to when everybody else was talking about it, but Bryce Terang is going to play for Team USA in the World Baseball Classic in the spring. Team USA building quite a squad. They've got, if you look at the way the roster is shaping up this year compared to what the roster was the last round of the WBC, especially on the pitching side, this is a different team that Team USA is going to be fielding compared to last time. I'm actually shocked at some of the names that they have participating in 2026.
Yeah, Tarek Skubal in a walk year in a final season of his team control, being willing to do it. Like, that's part of it for a lot of these guys, is there's contract stuff that they got to worry about, and that makes it hard for them to want to go out and pitch in not not team related games. And yeah, I mean, this is Aaron Loop was on the, no offense to Aaron Loop, but Aaron Loop was on the roster for the last Team USA run. And I'm sure, I mean, they don't want to lose again. That was an incredible championship game last time around. But they definitely do not want to lose
I do
again.
wonder if that's what kind of fueled the difference in the number of guys who are participating, just how much buzz that generated, because all the way down to the final matchup, it was Shohei and Trout. And
yeah,
it just feels like there's more buzz around it and more hype around it now than there was 4 years ago. And I'm sure the guys who participated to are probably coming back to their camps then and talking to some of these other guys about their experience. And it just seems like with the way that things went the last time that the tournament was held, this is just like what it seems like to me. I wonder if it's a higher priority for guys now.
Yeah.
After seeing the way it unfolded last time.
Yeah. And to at least actually touch on Bryce Terang, he absolutely was like, I mean, it was him or Nico Horner really was what it was going to come down to. If you looked at, assuming they wanted to do it and were able to do it, but like those were probably the two options. If they were picking second base kind of only, but like they could have gone the route of saying, hey, we're just going to take a bunch of shortstops and play them up the middle. And maybe that could have led to a guy like Terang not making it, but it felt like he was a pretty good candidate for it. And it's very cool to see him do it. And I know he also, I think this is now his third time around with the Team USA team, because he was on the 14, the U14 and the U17 back in the day. So that's cool to kind of, it happens with a decent amount of guys, but like, it's cool to see them make that whole journey through that whole system. And yeah, it'll be something like, it helped. The last one helped, but I think it's been growing for a little bit now. And it's cool to see that it's becoming a much bigger deal. And not just the baseball world, but kind of the sports world. I think people are much more in tune with it and paying attention now.
Also, during the winter meetings, Baseball America named the Brewers its Organization of the Year. We don't really need to go too deeply into that one. The success that the Brewers have had over the last almost a decade now, including the last couple of years, with just the continuity that they've been able to have and continuing to stay competitive, even as things have looked quite a bit different on the field from one year to the next. 2 years in a row where the Brewers won a lot more games than a lot of people were expecting them to. So certainly a well-deserved award, not only for kind of the front-facing guys who see a little bit more Matt Arnold, Pat Murphy, but a lot of the guys behind the scenes in the front office, in the dugout, who contribute to the success that the Brewers have had over the last several years. So taking home a little bit more hardware during the winter meetings. Now we'll kind of pivot into more of the rumor section here, some stuff that kind of came out during the week. Freddie Peralta and Trevor McGill garnering trade interest. Peralta's not surprising. McGill, we got a question about him on the last episode, I believe, asking if he would be a guy who, could be on the move. And I think we both kind of said it just depends on what his market looks like. We were a little bit unsure given that, yes, he's been very good when he's been on the mound, but he also hasn't pitched a lot relative to a lot of other closers. If Joel Sherman is to be believed, it does sound like there actually is some pretty significant interest in Trevor McGill, including from both the Mets and the Yankees. Kind of similar to the two guys the Brewers just traded away. It's a little bit different here because McGill has been a legitimately much better pitcher than Nick Mears was last year. I'm just always going to be of the opinion of trade away relievers. Just do it. Trade away relievers when their value is high. You can trade for relievers like Angel Zerpa when their value is still not, it hasn't peaked yet, but we know how short the shelf life can be on these guys. The Brewers, outside of in season when they traded Josh Hader, they were fine after they traded Josh Hader in the bullpen. They were fine after they traded Devin Williams in the bullpen. Both of those guys had some ups and downs, some well-documented ups and downs shortly after the Brewers traded them. You have Abner Uribe waiting in the wings. Zerpa, I think, is a guy who now can ascend into a high leverage role if you make some of those tweaks. Obviously, you're not trading Trevor McGill just to do it, but if there is a package there, and I'm the Brewers, I am not hesitating to take it.
Yeah, and this is, I don't have it in front of me, but he's 32, I believe, right now. If not 33, but I think he's 32 right now. Like, this is a guy who, it's a big power arm. He's been very, very good for the Brewers, but he's had some elbow concerns. He's hitting that age where guys start to just naturally lose velo if you're not Aroldis Chapman. So like it does feel like, and we talked about it last time, like you said, but like this is kind of the time to do it if the market is actually there. Capitalize on what he's given you. And as you said, like this is not the same level of trading Nick Mears or Isaac Collins or both of them together even. Like, you should be getting a real return if you're going to make the move, because if you don't, he's going to help this team quite a bit, assuming he's healthy. The other two, I think it was fair to question if that was going to be the case. That he will help the Brewers, even if it's some regression baked in. Like, he will still help the Brewers at a pretty high level as long as he's out there and able to pitch. But with all the questions and the aging and the fact that the Brewers can build a bullpen out of pretty much whatever is given to them. And I'm not saying that in like they could just trade everybody and bring up random minor leaguers and make it work, but they can go out and make a Grant Anderson trade when needed. They could hopefully do what we think they're going to do with Zerpa. They can do things like acquire Nick Mears at the deadline, and it didn't work out great the first year, but he had a great second year. You've got Trevor McGill was a DFA and then a trade for a player to be named later at the time they picked him up. So like, I just don't question that they'll be able to fill out a bullpen in a really productive way. And that doesn't mean you give people away, but it does mean when you have the opportunity to capitalize on value that probably won't be higher, you should go do it. And I also have a feeling the Yankees are going to get a bit desperate soon. They are missing out on a lot of relief arms that they were tied to. If I were picking a team, I think people are going to be like, oh, they're going to be hesitant after the Devin Williams experience. I don't think they will. I don't think that's going to affect them. That would still be the team that I would point out. Now, the Mets signed Luke Weaver. I wonder if they might be a little less, well, but they still have plenty of room to fit in another leverage type arm. So those two teams do make a bunch of sense. And frankly, relievers tend to have a pretty wide market. If people are interested, a lot of teams are usually going to be interested because it's something most teams are looking for. The Brewers are just a team that doesn't need to usually shop in that market to acquire the relievers that they get the job done with. So yeah, I hope they capitalize on it if the market truly is there. And if not, he's a Brewer and he'll probably help quite a bit as long as he's out there healthy.
Well, I have to credit Adam McKelvey for the next slew of topics here because I'm pulling all of this from his reporting during the winter meetings. We'll start with Freddie Peralta. Matt Arnold told Adam, the bar to do something there is going to be very high. So maintaining their stance that they don't really want to just give away Freddie Peralta, and they don't have to. I still don't think they have to, but it did sound like during the winter meetings that like the interest is getting really, really strong, which I guess isn't shocking once some starting pitchers started going off the board for the prices that they were. So to be able to like free agent starters and then Freddie being out there on a very affordable deal. We've both said pretty consistently we don't think it's going to happen because he's so important to not only what the Brewers are doing on the field, but also in the clubhouse. We both have felt that he fits into more of that Willy Adames mold, maybe a little more replaceable on the field than Adames was, but the clubhouse thing is big too. We'd both pretty consistently said, like, we only see it happening if it's an outrageous overpay and the Brewers just can't turn it down. If you still ask me to pick which way it's going to go, I'm still going to say that he stays, but it feels like that massive overpay is a little more likely than it seemed several weeks ago.
Yep, that's exactly what I was going to say. If I had to choose, I'd still say, and I've been like, when we were asked about this throughout the season, I was like, no, it's not going to happen. I don't think they're going to move him. I'm at the point where it's very much a toss-up, and it's, again, not because I think they want to move on, but I think they're going to get the offer that they want. I really do. So I guess I might even be leaning towards thinking I actually do kind of think the trade's going to happen now. Just based on everything we've heard, there's been a bunch of teams tied to him. We're watching guys like Dustin May, who, don't get me wrong, still an interesting guy, but he's getting $12.5 million to sign a one-year deal with the Cardinals right now. And the Cardinals aren't trying to compete. So it's a worthwhile, gamble for them to take, but just using him as an example, like that's where the market is for starting pitching right now. Freddie Peralta will cost you $8 million for this season. I think we've probably talked about this before, but like numbers wise, his final season comps really well to Corbin Burns last season in the Brewers uniform. He's half the money that Corbin Burns was going into his final season. Burns was getting $16 million. Freddie's getting $8 million. And I think part of what would make Freddie pretty enticing to a lot of teams is that he seems like the guy that might actually extend with a team who trades for him. Corbin Burns made it well known that he was testing free agency. Everyone who traded for him knew they were getting 1 year and then they'd have a chance to bid on him in free agency, but they weren't going to get any sort of exclusive negotiating chances. Like that really was never going to happen with him. I don't think that's the case with Freddie, and I don't think that's like a huge boost to his trade value, but I do think it's probably going to play at least a bit of a role in a team saying like, hey, one, not only might he negotiate, but he might be willing to take a little bit more of a team-friendly deal. We've already seen him do it once. He likes to lock himself in a little bit and be where he's at and get into the culture. Assuming wherever he goes next, if he does, he wants to do what he did in Milwaukee. Like, I think he likes being in a place and then he wants to stay there and build his roots. And I think he also knows Brewers wise, that was always going to come to an end at some point, just in terms of the money and what he was going to end up being able to get in free agency and how the Brewers operate. But I could absolutely see him getting traded somewhere and then agreeing to extend with that team without ever testing free agency, because that kind of seems like the personality he has. So I just think all of those things add up to the Brewers have a lot of leverage. Teams are starting to run out of options for adding to their rotation. It just feels like somebody's going to find that point where they meet what the Brewers are asking for, and it happens. So I guess if I had to pick, I actually would say I think a trade's going to happen. Now I'm still not 100% in on that, but if I were going to lean, I've flipped. I think it's going to happen.
Okay. I would give it, I'm going to say 40% chance he's traded. And that's compared to, I was probably at 15 to 20 going into the off season.
Yeah, I was at 10. Now I'm at 60.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. So kind of a reflection on how the Brewers tend to do this stuff, though. So if it is the end of the line for Freddie Peralta, he is going to go down as one of the most valuable starting pitchers in franchise history, which for all of the stuff that we've talked about with Freddie, some of the shortcomings in his game that he's just never really cleaned up and all that stuff. The ability to be on the mound as consistently as he has been pretty big during that time. But we'll see what happens here in the next couple weeks, months. But it sounds like the interest is definitely there. So we'll see. Moving on to another tidbit from Adam from the winter meetings on the coaching staff. The Brewers have not made any announcements to their coaching staff behind Pat Murphy. We know that Connor Dawson took a job with the Kansas City Royals as a hitting coach. Ricky Weeks moving into the front office, but other than that, really no news on that front. Adam said it's believed the Brewers still have some significant changes in mind for Murphy's staff that they've yet to finalize. And he added that at least one candidate for a hitting coach opening position interviewed in person with Milwaukee officials in Orlando. So we'll see if we get some more news on the coaching staff soon. The significant changes part is a little interesting to me. What exactly is that all going to entail? Obviously, we know some things are going to change because they are not going to hire a replacement for Ricky Weeks. So we know roles might look a little bit different, but it'll be interesting to see what else they have in the hopper. Yeah. Especially because they kind of have waited a while on this. I feel like normally we have news on this kind of stuff earlier in the off season. You know, we're approaching Christmas now, and there really hasn't been anything reported or finalized or nothing.
Yeah. So first of all, just in terms of timeline, like I saw the Pirates, I think yesterday tweeted out their full coaching staff. So we might just be getting to the point where it's kind of the normal time where everyone starts to kind of confirm their coaching staff, but the Brewers haven't had a ton of turnover and they've kind of been pretty quick to get it out normally. So maybe it's just not something we're used to and it's more common, but it does feel like it's later. We talked about Juan Sandoval a couple of episodes ago as somebody who's reportedly joining the Brewers staff. He did confirm in an interview that he is going to be on the big league staff. So that will be one of the people that's moving from. So originally I saw it reported as he was in the DSL the last 3 years. He was, I believe, I can't remember if it was last year or the last 2 years, but he actually had a higher title than that. Some sort of roving instructor of some sort, it was a higher level title. Now, he may have still been spending the vast majority of his time in the DSL or in the Dominican Republic, but he did have it. It isn't going straight from DSL pitching coach to big league staff. I believe there was a step in between that maybe didn't quite catch the eye or wasn't necessarily updated correctly in some spots. But that one, he himself did confirm that he will be on the major league staff. So that's one that we do know. But yeah, it sounds like, I mean, the obvious one is a Connor Dawson replacement. I think that's probably the one we're waiting on, if I had to guess.
One more note from the last couple weeks here. Jordan Montgomery, it seems like there's a chance that he could reunite with the Brewers. Adam did report that they had a pretty good relationship after the trade, and we did talk to Jordan Montgomery, the entire beat core, a little bit. He was in Milwaukee toward the end of the year, he made a donation to the made a donation to the Brewers Community Foundation, and just got an opportunity to actually kind of sit down, and he was talking to people who were on staff in the clubhouse and more present than you would expect from a guy who you knew was going to be out with injury, was never going to throw a pitch for this team this year. Like, seemed at first very much just like an on paper money part of that Shelby Miller trade. To see him, boots on the ground on site, actually getting to know some of the people in the organization, that was kind of like the first inclination that I think we saw of, okay, maybe there is some interest here in actually continuing the relationship between player and team. And then Adam kind of rehashing that, reporting that, there's a strong possibility that if he's healthy, the two sides could link back up. So it would be another arm that kind of joins that rotation mix come spring training. I'd be very curious to see what that deal would even look like. Would he get a big league guarantee? Would it be a minor league deal with an invite? I'm not exactly sure. And what makes his case trickier is not only did he miss a season due to Tommy John, he really struggled the season before.
Mm-hmm.
So we're now 3 years removed from, his last productive big league season. But then, like we talked about with Freddie, like the prices for starting pitching are high. So is he someone who, if he goes somewhere, could get a base MLB deal, start at like maybe $3 million or something, and there's incentives built on top of that? It'll be interesting to see, number one, if he does return, and then number two, what the contract looks like.
Yeah, my guess would be that there will just be a lot of innings incentives that are built into whatever contract he does sign, no matter who he signs with. It reminds me a little bit, honestly, of it's different circumstances because he was in the organization, like you said, last year, but it reminds me a little bit of Wade Miley when he signed in 2018. Had been a decent amount of time. He'd been dealing with injuries, a decent amount of time since he had shown much MLB success, but when he had, it had been pretty decent. And Montgomery was very good with the Rangers down the stretch of that season. Obviously got a very big contract out of it with the D-backs, and it just didn't work out, and he was injured. And I think most people who follow baseball knew how that one went. It was, I don't think either side has very many lost or feel very highly about the other. I think the Diamondbacks and Montgomery are both not big fans of the other right now. But I mean, it's not that far in the past to see somebody who had success. The Brewers have been showing for a while that guys coming off injuries have shown an ability to have pretty good success with the Brewers. Now, most of the recent examples have been shoulders, and this is an elbow, but even if you look at a guy like Miley coming off of his elbow injuries, he still showed that he could perform in Milwaukee and that they know how to handle that stuff. And like, we've talked a lot about how some of the people dealing with elbow injuries haven't had great success with Milwaukee, like a Nestor Cortez. But I think most of the people who have healed have actually showed pretty well and performed pretty well for the Brewers. So getting him into the organization, getting him familiarized with the training staff and with the people that, the front office and also some of the coaches when he did come by for that couple days or whatever it ended up being, even before this report, it just felt like it was something that made a lot of sense. And you almost wonder if you could even do a minor league deal that, has an opt-out date. And then when he's in the major leagues, you give a bunch of innings incentives. Like, that's kind of how I would probably look at it. I think that's kind of what Miley signed in 2018, if I remember right. I feel like it was something along those lines of like, he could opt out, but if he doesn't, and then he comes up, like, there's actually pretty nice incentives if he ends up being a part of the major league rotation. So that's kind of how I would look at entertaining it. And I would imagine, given that it seems like there's a relationship and he appreciates what the Brewers did for him once he got into the organization, like, it'd probably be pretty enticing to both sides. So if they can make something like that work, I think it's absolutely worth it to take a shot on what he was before the injuries and before he got to Arizona and see what comes of it. And odds are probably not a ton, but like, on the off chance it does, it could be pretty helpful for the Brewers. And it could be the lefty starter that currently isn't really set in stone for the Brewers right now. And I think ideally they'd probably like to have at least one lefty in the rotation just to at least give teams a different look from time to time. So, yeah, in my mind, it makes a lot of sense. It's just, like you said, a matter of how do you actually structure something that works for all sides.
Final note, Jeff Passan reported recently that Stephen Vogt, who, along with Pat Murphy, repeated as manager of the year in his league, he got a contract extension from the Cleveland Guardians after last season. So he's accounted for long term. Pat Murphy still is not, though. Remember, he signed a 3-year deal after he took over as the manager. He's going into year 3, and he has not been extended. So at this point, he is positioned to enter the season as a lame duck manager. I don't know if that needs to be a huge storyline yet. It was something that Adam touched on as well. A lot of this stuff sometimes just comes down to the relationship between, the manager and the team. Murph has been around a while. Maybe they just don't feel like that's something that they need to hammer out right now necessarily. Nobody seems to know for sure exactly what his plans are either long term for his future in the game. This is a guy who's been around a long time. He's had some health concerns. He is getting up there a little bit in age. He makes jokes all the time about his age, but he's obviously been very successful in the 2 years he's been here. So just something to kind of watch. Is he going to get a contract extension, or are they just going to kind of ride it out this year and then figure out from there? And then also, like, the Brewers, there is no immediate successor right next to him in that dugout, especially now that it didn't end up being Ricky Weeks. So just some things to kind of keep on the back burner as we keep moving forward here. Not the biggest storyline, obviously, but something that the Brewers are going to have to be thinking about as both parties move forward. Finally, a couple questions that we want to take just to tie up some loose ends here for this week. We'll start with Mason, who asked, how likely is it that a problem in the Brewers lineup doesn't come from the shortstop position and instead comes from one of the other 8 regressing? I guess it depends on how you define problem in the lineup. I really can't shake this feeling that Sal Frelick is going to take a step back next year. I think there's just, from a process standpoint, I don't think he actually sustainably improved quite as much as the numbers would tell you. He swung harder, he boosted the hard hit rate, hit more home runs. I don't know if he got better at those things enough to hit the number of home runs that he did, to get into double-digit home runs. I don't think that he actually did enough to sustainably live there. He had a lot that he was, some he was taking advantage of the dimensions of the park he was playing at, but a lot that, just dropping right over the fence kind of into the first row or so. The swing decisions are not great for Sal either. His chase rate is average, and he is not very aggressive on some pitches he probably should be more aggressive on. There's just, I would not be shocked if he goes back to being like a 90 to 95 OPS plus guy in right field next year. So if you want to consider that, a problem in the lineup from the right field position, you get below average offense from right field, like slightly below average offense. Sure. Joey Ortiz might still be worse than that though next year offensively. So it's, it's kind of hard to say. That's really the only one where I could see there being an issue though. Maybe first base if Vaughn regresses, but I think if Vaughn regresses, I think Jake Bauers is probably going to have a pretty good season. So I wouldn't be too concerned there. Durbin, I think, is probably going to be exactly the same guy that he was as a rookie. I think he's just got kind of a very established and limited range of floor and ceiling. It's probably right field for me if there's going to be another position, but the likelihood of right field being worse than shortstop offensively, I don't think it's all that high.
Yeah, I guess of the ones you listed, yeah, I think Sal's the one that I can see it happening. I don't know that I expect it, but I can see it happening. I shouldn't say I expect him to probably take a slight step back at least. I don't know that I expect it to end up in that sub 100 range, but like I don't think he's having the same season that he had this past season. I guess the question on this becomes what position is it? But I do think the one that could end up being an issue is that third outfield spot. You just don't really know exactly what that's going to be. So I don't know if it might be Churios in center and somebody else is in left. It might be Mitchell or Perkins in center, or both of them in center. And those are two guys that, while I talked about the positives when we talked about the Collins thing, like there is a real world where Mitchell struggles in a larger sample mightily at the plate. I think there's a real chance of that happening. And we've seen Perkins, and he can have good stretches and he can have cold stretches, and in smaller sample where maybe he's not playing a ton because they want Mitchell to try and get going. Like if he's struggling too, like I could see that one being a problem. But yeah, I think Ortiz is going to be better than he was last year. I think he will be noticeably better, and that still might not be that good, but it was just a very, very bad season for him last year. But he just feels like the guy that ends up being, and I don't even love using the word problem. I think it's just the weakest point of the lineup. Like, I don't think you need 9 hitters to be really good or better hitters in your lineup to be fine. Like the Dodgers, a guy who should not have been doing what he did, but Miguel Rojas is not a good hitter. He hit a home run in the biggest spot, but like that guy played a decent amount. They had guys who weren't great hitters in their lineup throughout the season. Pretty much every team does. So problem is always like a word I'm not super comfortable with. Now, if Ortiz is terrible defensively and his bat's bad, that's a problem. Like that's a guy who's not helping your team at all. But if you have 8 hitters who are fine and one guy who's not, I'm not going to be too concerned about that. But if Ortiz stays similar and then you see drop off from the center field spot and Frelick does drop to a sub 100 WRC plus, OPS plus type of guy, and Andrew Vaughn and Jake Bauers don't put it together, like now you start creating a problem because it's a bunch of spots that are maybe not actually even above average. Then that can be a problem. But yeah, for me, I think if you're just going off of what the question is really asking, I still think it's going to be shortstop. But center would, for me, be the next one that it wouldn't surprise me if they got down to that level.
Ron asked, do you view a right-handed reliever signing or using one of Chad Patrick or Logan Henderson out of the pen on opening day as more likely? To me, this kind of just comes back to what do they do with the last couple spots in the pen, and my guess is they're just going to want to rotate guys in and out. I do think they have enough right-handed shuttle depth in AAA that they don't really need to sign another righty. Yoho's down there. Easton McGee's down there. I still like Easton McGee's arsenal a lot. And I actually think that he's going to emerge as a really nice piece this year for them. He might still go up and down a little bit just because of the roster math, but I think they have enough guys in AAA from the right side that they can find a way to shuttle guys in while also keeping all of their starting options as stretched out as possible. Maybe Patrick or Henderson do get some pen innings. I would guess they're going to want to keep those guys stretched, though. I think they're going to find a way to fill it in with what they've got.
Yeah, for me, I think they now know that Patrick can transition to the pen at the end of the season if that's what they need, because they saw it happen. They saw how easily he could move into that role and perform really well in the playoffs. So for the regular season, his best value for the most part is probably being available as a starter and maybe even being in the rotation. Like it would not surprise me if Chad Patrick makes the rotation out of spring this year. But even if it is that 6th starter role where he's kind of up and down, and then becomes a weapon late in the season again out of the pen where the stuff ticks up and he's doing it in a smaller run where he gets to kind of really go all out down the pennant chase or something. Like I think that's probably where you see him in the pen. But I do think he'd be a good reliever if he ends up out there like as a full-time guy. I think he'd be a pretty good one, if not a really good one. I think the other part of this question is, do they trade McGill and what do they get for McGill if they trade him? Because they may want to go out and I still don't even think it'd be a signing. My guess would be it'd actually be more along the lines of another Grant Anderson type of trade where it's a lesser known righty arm that they bring in, probably with an option remaining or two, and that's how they fill a spot. So I would guess if it's an external addition, it's more likely to be either a minor league signing or a trade than an actual major league relief signing, no matter what. But if they don't move McGill, yeah, I think they use maybe Patrick or Henderson, more likely like Tobias Myers as a full-time pen guy, I would guess, next year if they end up going that route. Yeah, I think it would be dependent on McGill, and even then, I think an external addition is going to be more likely to be a trade.
I have a hard time believing that they're going to want to force one of their. If they need to, they will, but I think they're going to want to keep all their guys stretched out if they can. So, like, if there is no spot for Henderson, I think they're going to want to. I think they'd rather see him getting bulk work in AAA for now than bring him up and have him pitching, in really short stints or in that role where Murph doesn't really want to use those guys very often. Like, that just makes more sense, I think, from a development standpoint. But you're right; it is dependent on kind of what else happens, and if they do have a spot, yeah, I would guess that they probably go more of like that buy low trade kind of route. But again, I think if everything stays the way it is right now, number one, you just have all those lefties who could fill out the bullpen, like we talked about. Number two, like I said, you have some righties down there who can fill spots and kind of trade off a little bit. I don't know that they necessarily need to sign a righty or push one of those guys to the pen with the way things stand right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Henderson, I think, is 100% not moving to the pen at this point. I just wonder on a guy like Patrick if I still don't think they will, but given how good he looked in that role, if they view him as somebody that could legitimately just be a high leverage guy and that's the best value they get out of him, I could see them thinking that and going that way. But I would still guess, like you said, the only other part of it is that there's a lot of actual like good starting pitching prospects that are hitting AAA, either to start the year or should be very soon. And like at some point, how do you get all of these guys starts at the AAA and major league level where you might actually view it as, okay, we got to pick. Some of these guys are just so good in a pen roll. Let's just move them there and keep going. But yeah, I think their ideal outcome is to not move any of them until they either need to, or they view it as it's just not worth what they're doing as a starter because they're going to give us so much more out of the pen.
The real answer to this question is probably going to be 4 starters get hurt in spring training, and the entire thing takes care of itself because they have to move guys into the rotation. So there you go. Final question for the week. The Ginger asked more of a prospect question. So this is for Spencer. Seems like Cooper Pratt is one of the more divisive prospects at large, with some saying he should be a top 30 prospect in baseball and some saying at the edge of the top 100. Why do you think he's so controversial among the industry?
The bat. It's the bat. There are fair questions about whether the power is going to be there. Now, I just see his body type, and I still think he's going to be able to add some bat speed and start to get to the power in games because he hits the ball in the air to the pull side a decent amount. But his 90th percentile exit velo this year was below average, even for a guy his age in the minor league. So we're not talking just at the AA level, and a 20-year-old having slightly below wouldn't be that shocking. Like it was below average even for his age. So right now he's just not tapping into what looks like a body that should be able to get to some pop. Maybe that changes, and it's absolutely possible that it will. But right now it's a glove first with some very good swing decisions, good bat to ball, good ability to probably hit for some average and take walks. And despite not crazy good speed, he is a very, very good base runner. Like you can see it watching him, the reads. I saw him in person. He has great instincts. You can just kind of see it right away. So I do think he's actually going to be a base stealer and a guy who impacts the game on the bases. So there's like a lot of really good things there. But if he ends up being just like I think right now, if you were projecting and not projecting bat speed to be added, you have to project him to be at like a league average hitter at best. And again, with a good glove at short and good base running and all of that, that can still be a very valuable player. And that's why he still ends up on the outskirts of the top 100 for people who view him that way. The people who put him near the top 30 are the ones who think the power is going to be there eventually. And I lean closer to that because I do think he's going to add some. But at one point, I think people thought he might be like a 20 to 30 homer guy. I don't think that's ever coming. I think he's going to be someone who might give you 15. And if he does, he's probably a really, really good player in the big leagues who's helping the team a ton. But if he doesn't, then it's somebody where it's like, okay, he's not blocking Jesus Mate from coming up and playing shortstop. We can make room and maybe move Pratt somewhere else or view him as a utility guy. And I think that's kind of where the difference in opinions comes in. Like Fangraphs he won't be in their new top 100. They put him 8th on the Brewers list. I don't agree with that fully, but Longenhagen has been ahead of the curve on some of the Brewers prospects who've fallen off. So that does catch my eye and concern me a little bit. But I have a little bit more faith in the power being there. So we will see how that plays out. But for me, that's the biggest reason.
That's going to do it for us this week on the Brewer Fanatic podcast. We'll be off next week. We wish everyone happy holidays. We will be back after that, though, right around the start of the new year. So Friday, January 2nd is when the next show should drop, barring anything outrageous that occurs in the meantime. Until then, thank you all for listening, and we'll see what else the offseason has in store.